Hi everyone, welcome to Filmmakers and their films. Today we'll be talking about history and memory, starting with Hiroshima Mon Amour. And with us to take us through is Raghavendra sir, who's a well-known film critic and author. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, we'll begin with this thing of what exactly history is. Okay. Now, is history a record of the past? It's not quite a record of the past. It's written, there's actually history, there's an attempt to not simply record the past because it has to be selective, but to find some kind of pattern in it, and some kind of meaning in history. Okay. There has to be, and the important thing is that history will always have, there's a general consensus on what the important facts are. Okay. I mean, the actual number of facts are infinite, but for it to make any sense, there have to be limited number of events chosen, selected, right? And these things will have to be generally, there has to be consensus on what the significant events are. And the point is that different intellectual communities try to give different interpretations to history in terms of cause and effect, what caused what, right? The kind of history we learnt in schools would be of the kind of in the will of the king kind of thing, right? Then the Marxists came and they talked of impersonal forces like like the productive forces and the classes and class struggle and that kind of thing. But the basic thing is, it has to have a pattern. It has to have a meaning. That is, by itself, it has no meaning. But the point is that human beings have to make sense of it. And it was also used by many people as a means of predicting what is likely to happen. In fact, the Marxists were particularly, led to go on looking at the French Revolution as some kind of model by which their own revolution would proceed. And this led to a lot of people, misunderstanding Stalin, and Stalin's rise can be attributed to the fact that his mind was uncluttered with this need for theorizing. This is basically thing. Okay. Now, underneath all this is the basic framework of fact, which is not questioned, right? Okay. So the question is that history is never the truth. It is never the truth, but its value comes from its perceived truthfulness to the past, to facts. Okay, this is basically its value comes from that. Okay, now let's look at something like, let's look at little speculatively. What about 21st century history? What do you think of 21st century history? Is it possible to write 21st century history? But I mean, my own thing is, see, something like COVID, right? Something like COVID, something like the rise and fall of ISIS, for instance. Okay, there is no consensus on what the facts are, right? Nobody knows why COVID came, where it came from. And I doubt if it will ever be known where it came from, whether it was actually a creation in a laboratory or it was actually accidentally, the result of some bat infection or something in some cave in China. Nobody knows that. The same thing with ISIS, right? There are all kinds of theories about where it came from. Some people say this group was responsible. Others say Saudi Arabia. Others say US. There are all kinds of theories about it. So which means, and not only that, which means that there is no consensus on the underlying facts in contemporary history. This is largely accentuated by the thing of, social media, the kind of fake news going about. So the question is, when you say post-truth, when you talk about the decade was called post-truth or something, right? Post-truth means there are no facts. There are no truth. There is no truth. For example, there are all kinds of interpretations. They seem to sort of precede fact. There are no facts which everybody is agreed upon. I think, so by and large, my own anticipation is that you cannot have a history of the 21st century the way you had a history of the 20th century. Now, if you take the 20th century, for instance, if you take facts in 20th century, many of those things are controversial. Like, for example, you take something like, they could be controversial, but they're not. For example, you take something like the Holocaust, right? Now, the Holocaust, everybody knows certain things about the Holocaust. Now, 6 million Jews exterminated is something which is widely agreed by. But the question is it a fact? It seems it's been pointed out that the total amount of coke which was consumed in Auschwitz were about 3 million people were supposed to have been put to death in Auschwitz, or 4 million or something. Majority, almost 50%, were in Auschwitz and Sobibor, which is also associated with Auschwitz. The total coke consumed was enough for less than 1 million, right? For cremation. So the question is, how do you account for the fact that 4 million deaths are accounted here, but there are only coke was consumed only for less than 1 million deaths? So these are issues. But the question is, as if by convention, 6 million is a number that is by consensus people have agreed for whatever the reason. We won't go into that. But the question is, they seem to have agreed upon that. So the point is, the consensus is much more important. Okay. Now, history serves a purpose in that we seek to learn from it and persuade others to our viewpoint. Okay, different people learn different things from history. It is not that the same events have the same meaning to everybody, right? They have different meanings to different people. Okay, so there are interpretations. But the question is, for example, you take Nehruvian history and you take the Nehruvian history is false in some sense, like all history is false, right? It's not in the sense it is being done in a way to further a certain line of thought, a certain line of argument, a certain ideology. It's been used like that. If Gandhi, for instance, there's truth about Gandhi. No, I mean, Gandhi, there's a mythology around Gandhi, right? There's a mythology which is not strictly the truth. For instance, does anybody know here that the Dandi March, the salt thing, right? The salt march, okay. At the end of the salt march, the salt tax was not repealed, okay. So the march was important. It did not get its effects at all. But do our history books tell us that? Do our students learn that in school, that the salt tax was not repealed? That they just did the march and they came back, the salt tax remained. That's basically it, right? So the question is that the history is written in a certain way to further a certain end. So it's always problematic in the sense it's never the truth. It's used to persuade people. Nationalist history has a certain end, which is to celebrate nationhood, etc., etc. Okay. So there are different slants. So if there is an Nehruvian thing is different from the right-wing Hindutva thing, it doesn't mean that both are equal. Okay. There's a certain sophistication taking facts into consideration, right? That sophistication itself is an end in itself, right? That seems to be the case. So the question is, just as scientific theories, all scientific theories are inevitably false because one theory replaces another. Okay. The later theory, because it explains more things than the first theory. Let's look at it this way. If you have a theory, I have a theory. My theory includes your theory in the sense explains your theory. Your theory does not explain my theory. My theory is superior to yours, right? Okay. A third theory will come along that will explain more things that will be superior to both ours. That is the way. But all of them are false in some sense, but there's a degree of falseness. There seems to be an improvement. So historically, there should be an improvement, that every theory of every historical thing should be supplanted by something else, which is an improvement upon it. But intrinsically, all of them are false in some way or the other. They are not the truth. They are other derivative of the truth. Okay. Now let's look at the issue of public memory. Are public memory and history the same? No. History is a memory that has been deliberately processed with a certain purpose in mind. Okay. There's a purpose in history, so it has been processed. Public memory is not the same thing. Okay. Private memory, when it's related to public, always remembers differently from the way events are recorded. Now, if you see something, if you see a war, let's say Chinese war, the way the Chinese war is represented today in history, hardly represented at all because it was a defeat. But the point is that it is not remembered in the same way as I would remember it when I was some 7 or 8 or something like that, right? When the Chinese war, 8 years or so, when the Chinese war took place, Sino-Indian war took place, I would remember it differently. Now, where historical fiction comes in, it's very important at this point, please pay attention. Historical fiction, out of which historical recreations come into importance, is historical reinterpretations through fiction, okay, falsifies in a certain way to pick up discarded elements from history, okay. Like if you're dealing with a war, you look at an individual soldier's experience, something which has not been written about in history books. Okay, if you read War and Peace, you'll come to that. You'll come to understand what this means. So it is, you pick up things from a dustbin of history. So what is dominant history, what is understood as dominant history is by and large subverted or questioned by the historical fiction. Historical fiction is artistic truth, which is different from historical truth. They're very different from historical truth. Okay, it's an artistic truth. Okay, so the question is, historical fiction is different. Nowadays, what is happening is, when you write political fiction or something, or say on Kashmir issue or something, what people do normally is, okay, they try to take newspaper reports and try to flesh it out. They will let's take a say caste something. Okay, they will try to give proper names to caste archetypes or religious archetypes or political archetypes. They'll give them political names. See, for example, if you were to take something like the Sepoy Mutiny, which is the first war of independence, 1858, 1857. What will happen is, you will take, the fact that the cartridges were either pig fat or cow fat, and they'll just simply give names to that. That is, which is the way something like Amitabh Ghosh would do. Okay, it's not simply a matter of giving names, proper nouns, okay, to archetypes taken from history, but to actually look at history, what it might look at like from the ground level. Okay, now you look, for example, you look at films. You've seen Kubrick's Paths of Glory. You've seen Paths of Glory. You look at Paths of Glory, you will find there's an actually worm's eye view. You're looking at something from a viewpoint which is not that of history. You're trying to actually awaken something, looking at it from another point of view, trying to look at it contrary to the dominant point of view, which is what the purpose of historical fiction is, right? This should be the way that all the films I'm going to deal with now, all the films are trying essentially, okay, to look at it as artistic truths set in the historical periods, which are very different from actually taking history and making fiction out of it, right? You actually find a new angle to history and you're trying to tell it in a new way. This is basically the function of historical fiction, which is not the same thing as history writing. Any questions up to here? Any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Is the point, is it difficult, whatever I'm saying? Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. So just one question. So I'm just wondering, like, if there are so many, like, studying history as a narrative, how do people go about studying it? Do they take different perspectives of it? Because you never know what actually happened.
Yeah, we don't know. See, the point of that is because that usually what happens is by and large, what happens is that syllabuses in history, college history, are set by ideologies, right? The CPM will have a certain ideology, which is why when a regime changes, they want to have, there are different historians or different slants to various things. Irfan Habib will have a certain thing on what's his name, this chap Aurangzeb. Somebody else will have another. So the different historians have different takes on it. By and large, there was an agreement among Nehruvian historians on what history was. It was largely to further secular ends. The purpose was to further secular ends. Now it seems to be if new historians are going to come, their basic thing is different, right? But sometimes, what happens is, like, for example, you take this issue of the Aryan thing, whatever was called the Aryans, now they call it a steppe pastoralists. 2000 BC, people came from Central Asia and came into India. They destroyed the existing civilizations, all that thing, and they eventually became Brahmins, right? That the fact that they are foreigners, everybody was a foreigner in India, is generally not something which will be appreciated by the Hindu right wing, because they want to believe that there are foreigners are only certain sort. But the point is that now there is genetic evidence. It seems to have come about genetic evidence which points to the fact that they were all foreigners at some point or other, of course. And that is true at 2000 BC. The Babur was some in the medieval period, right? So it makes a lot of difference between the two. But the point is this, that if genetics, for example, DNA testing, that will make a completely different, shall we say, they change the thing and we can't question it anymore. So the only way you can question these things is to reinterpret it in some way so it's a completely different thing. But basically the point I want to make is that finally, whatever history is taught in schools or colleges, would be essentially, in some way or the other, determined by the ideology of the regime which is promoting education, right? So that is the way it would happen. So the question is, if there's a huge regime change as is happening today, but also there's a fact that with the globalization of education, with education, the question is whether what you're teaching in colleges and schools today, whether they'll be accepted globally. You can't suddenly change, like for example, your global education. For example, you study something in colleges today, whatever is current about India in world education will have to be preserved in some way. You can't suddenly change everything here. All around the world, certain things are known and understood about India. There's consensus, worldwide consensus on what is true about India, right? About history. You can't change something locally and say that from now on we're going to say this happened, this happened. Therefore, the whole thing is. You can't do that. I mean, this is a fundamental issue. So the question is, with the globalization of education and people, in fact, how many? I mean, if you want to study history, I mean, the world, how many of them? How many Indian universities have the kind of, shall we say, credibility that an American university would have in even to study your PhDs about India? I mean, many people would prefer to do it in an American university, right? A top American university doing a PhD on India there will give you more credibility. Even in India, it will give you more credibility, right? Many of the institutes, say, for example, your new universities, private universities, actually hire, see, let us face certain things, right? Very few Indian disciplines, okay, get the kind of, local scholarship, gets the kind of, value that foreign scholarship will. And very few Indians do PhDs on international subjects. They finally end up doing, if it's sociology, they'll do it on something on caste practice in Travancore. Okay, something like that. That's the way it happens. So, okay, so let's go to the next one. Now, the films I've chosen here are all films which in some way, which are implicated in this, which these issues I've just raised are implicated. Now, Hiroshima Mon Amour, in this film, a French woman is in Hiroshima. She's an actress shooting for a movie, okay? And she's in a relationship with a Japanese man in Hiroshima. When the film begins, okay, the film is supposed to be about peace. When the film begins, the two of them are in some kind of embrace or something, and their bodies are covered with some kind of of dust, radioactive dust or something. It is shining. This is the basic thing. Okay. Now, the film is taking the woman's viewpoint. It's basically her viewpoint. He's only her lover. That's all it is, right? Now, the film is about present day Hiroshima. In fact, there are two aspects of it. Very large aspect of it has to do with the museum, the Hiroshima Museum, right? Which this woman, what's her name? I forget her name. She's gone to this museum and she's seen this and they're discussing the museum. There's a lot of stuff in the museum which is exhibited here. And the museum plays, what exactly is a museum? In a city museum, what would the Hiroshima Museum would be? What it would be? It would be, in my sense, a repository of the memory of Hiroshima. When you say Hiroshima Museum, it would be the explosion, the bomb museum, right? Whatever happened after the bomb, that would be there, right? So the question is, this museum seems to be preserving some sense of what happened when the bomb exploded over Hiroshima, right? That is what happened. That's what it's about, right? So it's a question of, it's a repository of public memory in the city of Hiroshima. This is what it's about, right? Now, the woman in this film knows about Hiroshima only from its the horror graphically represented in the opening, in that museum thing. My own sense of that radioactive dust is that when a person is in Hiroshima, I mean, your sense would be, I mean, the idea of, regardless of how much radioactivity there is in Hiroshima now or not, your imagination is somehow, shall we say, fully captured by that notion of Hiroshima being a radioactive place, that sort of thing. So it's possible, since the movie is, I mean, it's difficult to be sure about this, since the movie is about this woman, it's largely a subjective view of the woman, because you don't get to know much about the man. You get to know quite a lot about the woman, that it is basically a kind of subjective imagining about what Hiroshima, what the bodies are seeing in terms of dust, in terms of radioactive dust. Okay. Now, on one side is this museum which is trying to remember Hiroshima, the catastrophe in Hiroshima. On the other side is her marriage, and she's married, and obviously, since she's married, one of the first images you get is a wedding ring on her finger, right? So the question, you can assume also that this relationship with the man in Hiroshima is also brief in some sense, right? It's not going to continue for very long. So the question is, she confides in this man something about her past, which by her own admission, she has not confided in her own husband, right? Now, why does she confide in him in a way that she does not confide in her husband? My own sense is that you confide more with strangers than those you spend your lives with, life with, because when you live your life with somebody, right, your secrets are permanently in the custody of those people, and you have to deal. See, when you deal with people who know a lot about you, you have to deal with their knowledge of your secrets, right? It's not a pleasant thing. It's a thing of the highly uncomfortable thing to have to deal with people who know your secrets, right? So the question is, it is easier for this woman to reveal whatever her past is, which the husband himself does not know about, right? To deal with her past in that way, okay? To reveal this thing of her past only to this guy and not to her husband. This is fundamentally it, okay? What is this from her past? That she was a town called Nevers, Nevers. Once during occupation, she was in a relationship with the German soldier. Okay, they were planning to escape to Germany, but he was killed, and she was punished for collaboration with the Germans. You know that thing of collaboration, public humiliation, shaving of her head, cutting of her hair, and this kind of thing. She suffered from that, and she suffered quite a bit, and she moved from there to Paris. She kept quiet about her past. She's not told anybody about it. She suffered this at that particular time. Husband does not know about it. Nobody knows about it. That aspect of her identity has been completely kept secret from the rest of the public. This is basically it, okay? She has erased public memories about herself, okay? That is not part of her identity, okay? So the question is, Hiroshima and she are different. Hiroshima seems to be trying to preserve certain memories. She is trying to erase, she has tried to erase certain memories. Why is this that certain memories are being erased? The film doesn't bring it up. What do you think is the reason? Can anybody answer this question? What is the reason why certain memories are preserved? Why do you want to? I think it is basically, my own sense is that you have a certain identity, you have a certain image, you have a certain mythology around you. There are certain mythologies. Certain things would not be part of that mythology. See, for example, you take something like um, the Holocaust. I'll talk about Mr. Klein, the third film in the category. You will realize what I mean by this. So that certain aspects are inconvenient. Now, the fact that Hiroshima was a catastrophe and it's full of victims and people who suffered, would divert attention from somewhat from what the Japanese did during the war, wouldn't it? Okay. The Japanese record during the war in terms of war crimes and all that was not particularly, it seems to have been the Hiroshima in many ways eclipsed the horror of what the Japanese did in China. Okay. So that those horrors were eclipsed in many ways by Hiroshima. So the point is, we like to, conceal certain things about ourselves, remember certain things selectively. That seems to be the thing. And Hiroshima, the film doesn't bring that out in any way. But the important thing is the woman is trying to forget certain things, or rather forget certain things, okay? Which Hiroshima would rather remember certain things. So, I don't think Alain René is exploring this aspect of why certain memories are, it's not doing that. But the question is that the personal memory is different from the public memory. There seems to be something. Does anybody have anything to say about this film? What do you have? Anybody have any questions about this film? I don't know exactly what to make of it, actually, except for the fact that one is, a private memory which is sought to be forgotten. Other is a public memory which is sought to be propagated. Do you know exactly what to make of this movie? Exactly how are we to take it? Exactly.
So I think, it's also a suggestion wherein you have these brief encounters which become meaningful. And I also feel that, when it comes to marriage, it's more of a societal structure
Yeah.
wherein you're bound. So
Yeah.
maybe,
One of the things I think, the line which is you know nothing about Hiroshima, he keeps saying. You have seen nothing of Hiroshima,
yeah,
he keeps
yeah.
saying. Okay. There is something here in that because he repeats the line so much, obviously that line is important. Now, what does that mean? If it is just that, you've seen nothing, you've just seen the museum, you've not seen really the horror of it. Okay, it's fairly banal. Okay, you've not seen enough. That's a fairly banal thing, right? Anybody can say that. Is that all to it? Is that all it means? I found one thing very very poignant is that thing that old woman sitting in front between these two, right? Sitting between the
Yes,
man and
yes,
sitting
yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
man and
yeah.
she obviously share certain things. There are certain memories. What is there in her head is not in the museum. Again, personal memory. Her personal memory she cannot penetrate, and her personal memory he cannot penetrate. There is something like that. So that thing of that common memory, that public memory is a completely different thing from personal memory. It seems to be is playing on these things, and like in that other Night and Fog that Chap's earlier film, he's more sort of just bringing up these issues without really resolving it anyway. He seems to be generally counterposing these things. That's the sense I got. But the point is the impenetrability of personal memory, which just fades away, and finally what is left is the thing of the museum, right? This public memory. I mean, so the old woman has obviously seen the thing, right? You take it for granted that she has seen the explosion. She has also seen it, given the idea. Now there's some communion between them. They've been part of the thing. When I went to Russia, I had this feeling, when you go and sit in these metro, okay, the trains, and you see old people sitting there, what they've gone through, people, what they've gone through in Russia, okay, Stalin, this, that, an 80-year-old woman, a 70-year-old woman sitting there. Now it is 70 years old, 1950, okay, Stalin was still alive, right? Say if 80-year-old woman it would be 1940, that means they would be fully cognizant, and by the time they came to 1950, 10 years old, they would have seen a lot of things, right? What they've gone through, what the horrors they've gone through, desalinization, this, that, gulags, people that their near ones being killed in the war, who every family is being robbed of people. You have that sense of the old person, right? You Indians, you won't get that sense. You don't get that sense. I don't know what it is. You don't get that sense, and you see an old person, you don't get that sense that there is history in this person. There is no horrific events. Like, for example, if you see your own grandfather, 80-year-old grandfather, you don't get the sense that British colonialism experience he has in his head, because that what is that catastrophe, that the fact of a trauma is necessary. I think the trauma in some way, okay, the trauma makes memory, gives it a certain substance, which without that trauma, the memory wouldn't have much meaning, okay? It's probably that traumatic element which gives those people those faces, that this woman's face has that significance. Okay. 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 No, please, any questions up to this point? Any questions? Yeah, please. Can I look at the chat thing and answer? Okay. Why has on line of the woman's view? I think because it's a French movie. I don't think they would have. Look, I'll tell you, one of the things is that Rene, because he's making a French movie, okay, would not be able to tell the story from the point of view of the man. In fact, it's a kind of truthfulness. He only tells it from a point of view he knows. He knows collaboration. Okay, if a Japanese were to make the movie, he wouldn't try to take the Frenchman's position, right? It's a French movie in every way. So I don't think he could have taken the Japanese person's point of view, because the way Rene would see Hiroshima is precisely from the point of view of the visitor to the museum, right? That's the way I would see it. Okay. Any doubts? Any further questions or any doubts on my answer? A French movie would take a French person's position. It would not take a Japanese position. It would be I mean, if you take, like, for example, international production, you take a position of Japanese as well as it's possible, you would probably be untrue. You can't be. You can only know from one perspective. So you take one perspective to which you're more familiar with, and forget about the other perspective. Right? That's the way I see it. That's all. So then let's go to the next one. Next film. It's called That Night at Beren's. Now, this is a particular film which is set in, it is set in a crucial moment in the French Revolution. When the king was in custody, he was trying to flee to the border at that particular point. The border were, the kings in Europe were all generally related to each other. Many of them were related to each other. Mountbatten, for instance, was related to the Russian Tsar. Now, many of them were related to each other. Okay. So the question is that they might have gone to war, but basically they're blood relatives in some way, or by marriage or some such thing, right? Cousins or by marriage. The entire European royalty, the French, the Germans, the Habsburgs, whatever, the Russians, they would be related by marriage at least. At a certain point, the king escaped and he was going to the border, okay, to join forces, the armies which were opposed to the French Revolution, right? So the point is, till a certain point, till a certain moment, the king was embodiment of the state in France, right? The king was the state. This is very different from prime minister or president in a republic. President, in some way, the prime minister is not embodiment of the state. The prime minister is simply head of this. He's just ruling. He's just the, what is it called? The representative. He seems to be administrative head or whatever. He is not embodiment of the state. The president is. But the king was the state. Okay. Which is why a plot to assassinate the king or any kind of rebellion against the king is treason. You get me? Now, the point is the king goes and joins the enemies of the state, enemies of the country at the border. Isn't the king guilty of treason? Okay. So the king himself was guilty of treason at this particular moment. As a result of the fact that he was guilty of treason, he was executed some 15 months later or so. He went to trial and all that. He was executed along with his wife and all those people who fled with him. So this was actually a turning point of the war at that particular moment, right? So what this guy has done, Ettore Scola has done, is this king has taken a path from Paris to this Varennes, this place called Varennes, where the king is just near the border. I don't know which pronounce. I'll call it Varennes. The king is going to next day get out of there and join the enemy forces on the other side. Right? He's caught and brought back. Is the basic thing. But alongside, what Scola does is to have another coach which is going along the same path. On this, in this coach are three or four important people. One is Tom Paine, who's an American revolutionary. Another is Giacomo Casanova, okay, played by Marcello Mastroianni. And the third is another French writer, journalist, and all that, who's written a lot of stuff. A kind of all these three people, importantly, are writers. Okay, they're all writers, and they have given us visions of the age in different ways. The age of that particular time, the century, the French Revolution, all these things, the entire thing of how the royalty conducted itself, all that comes to us today through writers, right? They are the people who have recorded it. So when you want to interpret history, you'll interpret history through the writings of these people, not necessarily only these people, but they lived at that particular moment. So what Scola has done is to say that these people are there. So their conversation becomes like a kind of historical commentary of different people taking different positions. This is what Scola has done. Okay. So Tom Paine is a devotee of equality and sympathetic to the revolution. Casanova was highly appreciated in the courts, in the royal court. So he's sympathetic to the old aristocracy. And there is a case to be made for both things. You see, what happens is once a revolution comes in and you have people, you have the classes who are suddenly empowered. See, what happens is when classes which are uneducated in many ways, who have not been empowered, are suddenly given power, they don't know how to conduct themselves. So they conduct themselves in, shall we say, uncivilized ways. Okay. They demand equality, but they don't know what to do with equality. So you have this thing, the boorish kind of peasantry, okay, which is conducting itself in a way which was not conducting earlier. They're no longer suppressed by power. They're no longer suppressed by authority. They're trying to speak out. They're trying to do that. So what the film is doing, like for example, on this thing, there is this woman played by Hannah Shigula. She's a baroness, right? She's a baroness. She's actually a lady in waiting for the queen. Okay, she's a confidant of the queen. Lady in waiting means a person of the aristocracy who's actually of a high intellectual level, high cultural level, who's a confidant of the queen, who waits on her, and the queen sort of rewards them in many ways. The husband will be a courtier and that kind of thing, right? So obviously she sees everything. She's traveling by this, so that she's also going to go over to the other side, right? So this conversation takes place between this, I think, Casanova and this woman. Takes various conversations are there. What this man is doing is reflecting on the time through these intellectuals are going in the parallel thing, right? To the events and all that, how the crowds are behaving and all that. So the question is, you get a picture of the times, you get a picture of the event, and you look at a picture of the reflections all together in one movie. This is basically the way. Okay. At the same time, Casanova, I mean, many of them are they've got a personal problem. Casanova himself is a kind of, what is the word? Libertine. Or a libertine in reduced circumstances, because he's become old, he's decrepit, he's no longer like what he has to make his face up to still look attractive in some way. But he's fully aware of the fact that so this thing is there, that personal subjective element. So what the man is doing is what I said in the early part, is to look at okay, create a fictional assembly of various people with different sensibilities and look at history from their perspective. Okay, to look at history from the perspective of private memory, to look at it from the thing about the individual. As like for example, Tolstoy would look at some Battle of Borodino in War and Peace. He would look at it from the viewpoint of a sergeant. Okay, how the advance of the would look like. Okay, World War II movies would do that. They would put a soldier on the ground and look at advancing into Berlin, how they come up on the chancellery, how Hitler this thing would look at. The war movies do that, right? They try to, if you look at, for example, Ivan's childhood Russian films, you look at that. There's always a kind of personal thing, because the Russians knew in many ways what personal memory was like. Many of them had seen the war, right? So the question is, they can bring that individual perspective, which history itself does not record, right? That they can do. So what the Ettore Scola is doing here is to give a personal account. Obviously, this is true. Nobody could have remembered it at personal level. To create this fictional character called Casanova. He's not a fictional character, he's a real character. But he becomes a fictional character in this movie. You get me? In the sense, he's given sensibilities. He's given a personality which corresponds with the Marcello Mastroianni's aged self, right? All this sort of stuff in a way to look at the French Revolution from that perspective, from 2 or 3 different perspectives. In this way, we don't know much about Tom Paine except that he was revolutionary. He was for liberty and all that. He was sympathetic to the revolution. He also was there and there. So all these people are present there. So this is basically the function of this. Finally, in the last scene, I think the very moving scene, is that the king has got these clothes, right? He's got these clothes, these grand clothes. The king is nothing himself without, he had to exhibit himself to the soldiers dressed in these grand clothes. So then he goes to these things and these clothes have been left behind and he's taken back without these clothes. He was planning to dress up in these gorgeous clothes, exhibit himself. Those clothes actually represented his power as king of France. Okay. Those clothes gave him authority to tell people that you're acting on my behalf and acting on behalf of France. Without those clothes, he's not even France. This is the fundamental thing, right? He's not France at all. He's just a monarch who's been deposed. He's not France. If he wears these clothes, he becomes France in some way. Okay, so this is the basic thing. Okay, he has to leave them behind as a frail individual, no longer with any thing that we're leaving those clothes behind, with no connection to the state at all, but a frail individual has to await his fate or whatever at the hands of the state, which is now entrusted to the people, right? So that concludes this film. So we'll go to the third film of the category. The third one is one called Mr. Klein. It's a very extremely interesting film. It's a very different thing. It is set in the Nazi occupation, the German occupation of France, which is actually a very different way from the other movies about the occupation of France. Did you see it, Mohammed?
Yes, sir. I did.
What do you think? Okay, you answer it, because why? What way do you think it is different from other movies, by and large? Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's quite intriguing for me because there's only we see one perspective at one time, and
Okay.
we don't see the other
So
perspective.
one important thing here is
Yeah.
the Germans are hardly shown. Okay. I think this is very crucial in the film, that they are not saying that Germans are responsible for the segregation of the Jews. They are saying the French are responsible, right? See, the point is that makes a big point in the film, that the Germans are hardly shown. Every other movie about the French occupation, the Holocaust, will tell it from the viewpoint of the Germans are doing this, Germans are doing that, right? In this particular film, the Germans don't do anything. The Germans are not there. Okay. So we are talking, that is the crucial thing, that this film is doing it. In this particular film, what happens is, to those who have not seen it, Mr. Klein, played by Alain Delon, okay, played by Mridula, you may not have seen the movie, played by Alain Delon, is actually an art dealer who's buying up art from fleeing Jews. He's called Mr. Klein. He's not Jewish, he's Gentile, okay, that is, he's non-Jewish. He traces this thing to Christian background, Catholic background, but his name is Klein, which could be Jewish. On one particular day, a magazine which is meant only for Jews comes to his address, right? That magazine is subscribed for by Jews to find out what is happening to the community. Now, when he gets this magazine, he realizes that he's been singled out as a Jew, and he realizes there's one more Jew called Mr. Klein. Okay, same thing, Robert Klein. And this Robert Klein's thing has come to him accidentally. So the whole film is about this guy, this Robert Klein, the non-Jew, trying to chase out that Robert Klein, the Jew, okay, to prove to the authorities that he is not a Jew, that there's another Jew of the same name. He's never able to find this man, okay. What is known about the other Robert Klein is he's got a German Shepherd dog. He's got a girlfriend. He's having a relationship with a married woman. Various things are known about him. Where he lives, what is that? But they're not able to source any photograph of this guy, his identity. Everything is mysterious. Finally, the thing is that when even the German Shepherd starts following the man around, right? Everybody mistakes him. In fact, that man's this description is somewhat like this man's description, right? So the point is, this man desperately trying to get rid of whatever Jewish taint is on his identity, to get rid of it. Then all the time you find that it's the French who are basically singling out Jews and not the Germans. The Germans are there in the background. They appear in this cafe scene, that scene, this, that. But the French are only too eager to go along, to go along with this thing. And what happens here is, what happens, I find very interesting, okay, is that there was one thing, one film I saw where he said that Hitler, okay, by going out against that anti-Semitism was a European phenomenon, that Hitler only acted, okay, fulfill the innate desires of Europe by going out against the Jews. There is something, not in this film, but in some other film which says that, but it actually acts like that, because there seems, for example, in that cafe thing, where they're acting out an anti-Jewish thing with the guy with the big nose who's trying to steal things. People are laughing. It's all in French, right? It's all in French. Now, the point is the French are enjoying this skit. French are sitting in this cafe listening to this anti-Jewish thing, right? It's not the Germans. The Germans are also there enjoying it. But the point is that the French, because it's in French, it's not in German, right? So the question is, they're making this thing that basically this entire thing of the Holocaust, which is basically the French did it willingly in occupied France. They mobilized the French, they mobilized the thing very willingly. The police acted against Jews willingly. Okay. This is what the film is making out. In fact, the thing is that people are, they go to the doctor, examines their physical features, like their nose, their eyes, their cheeks, their chin, their bodies and all that, to determine the racial characteristics. Is there anything? And this is a thing that people are going out of their way to get certificates from doctors saying that there is no Jewish thing. And the doctor is not collecting money for that, to certify that you're a Jew or what percentage of Jew, whether you're a doubtful case or not. The doctors, the French doctors, okay, are collecting money and taking, just look at this film, right? They're collecting money from French persons to certify them as Jewish or non-Jewish. So the question is, that woman, that man's face when he's examining this woman, the French woman, okay, to say whether she's Jewish or not Jewish, in a slightly disgusted way, is actually showing disgust at her Jewish characteristics, right? So this film is actually more about the French themselves distancing themselves from the Jewish thing. So finally, that the entire thing, the mystery of this man, it's turned into some kind of identity mystery. Is disguised as that, as a kind of mystery of what is man's identity. But basically, it's a commentary on the French activity during the war, when the Jews were pushed aside and when surrendered. Okay, surrendered. So finally, in the process of distancing himself from the Jews, the protagonist himself goes to his death with the Jews. They're all rounded up and sent off according to alphabetical order, sent off in the train to the concentration camps. Okay, that's what this film is about. Okay, I don't know how many of you have seen this movie. I hope you've seen it. Any questions on this film? Did you get any ideas about this film?
Two questions. So one for the previous film and one this one.
Yeah.
There's a scene wherein Robert goes and tells that man, basically who arranges his papers later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he tells them that, I've got to know that there is another guy who's the same as me or something. And he gets him arrested. How do you see that, sir? Like, is it a part of...
Well, who gets whom arrested?
The guy gets the other Klein arrested from the apartment. When both Robert and Klein, they were planning to meet.
Yeah, he gets some man arrested. I don't think that other Klein is never found, actually.
Okay.
Never found. Okay. He gets somebody arrested. The other Klein is never found. Which is why at the end he keeps going after him. Who is the Klein? When they call out his name, the actual Klein, they find some other Jewish and the Jewish guy is arrested. But the actual Mr. Klein, the other Klein is never found. Right?
It's never found.
There is something that man who sells him, the guy with the spectacles who sells him initially, sells him the painting.
Yeah.
I don't think he's Klein. He's just a Jewish guy. That's all. Who also goes along and he's also arrested. There's a Nabokov story. I don't know. It's called, I think, Signs and Symbols. Where he just passing, he says about Aunt so-and-so. He says, okay, Aunt so-and-so. The fate of various people. He's looking at a family album.
Right.
And he's looking at Aunt so-and-so. It says Aunt so-and-so who's put to death with all the people she had worried about. So the question is that when finally people go to their deaths, okay, you think that fellow is a crook, that fellow is a Jew, this fellow is this, that fellow is this. You go on, like even the communists, they went on labeling that man capitalist, this man reactionary, that man. But finally, all of them are bundled together and executed, right? It's like that. So people you hate because of certain things and you accuse of certain things in a fascist regime, in that kind of thing, right? Those people you have accused of various things, you will be bundled with them and taken to the same fate, right? That is what it's all about. That's what the thing is about, okay? So the question is that Robert Klein meets the same fate as those, this is the irony, that he would meet the same fate as those people whom he has tried to distance himself from. This is basically the irony in the film. This is what it's about, okay?
Yeah. But they do find, the other client comes in, right? In the conversation they are having, wherein they plan to meet.
I know you only hear about him. You never see him, right? If you actually saw the client and his position is, then how does this guy in the end, how does Alain Delon in the end still go around looking after him? Why does he still search for him? Why does he go to that, auditorium, not auditorium, the stadium, right? Why does he go to the stadium?
The scene happens when he gets down from the train. And he goes to his house, he makes a call and both are talking.
I don't know, but that woman, that household is an aristocratic household, right? Who gets arrested? Okay. I don't know. I've seen this movie some time back. I just went through it. Yeah. Right. You have a look at it, but it's unlikely that this Klein is ever found in the whole film. He's a mysterious character who's always been away. Even the dog has attached itself to this guy, okay, not to the other Klein. So it's the other Klein's dog, right? The woman, everything is outside this. So there's basically that, okay? If in fact Mr. Klein was found, this entire mystery which is created around him would no longer matter at all, okay? Let's go to this last one, which I think is a truly great film. These other films, in my opinion, are not great films in that sense. This, I think, is an astonishing film, but it's an extremely difficult film also. Crystal of My Car is a very difficult film. I would rate Alexei Garman probably I would rate him higher than Tarkovsky in many ways as a filmmaker, but he's a very difficult filmmaker. He's not easy. This story is set in 1953. Okay. 1953 is the year of Stalin's death. It's the year of Stalin's death. And there's just been something called the doctor's plot. I believe Jewish doctors, again has to do with Jews. Jewish doctors were rounded up at a certain point. They were accused of conspiring to kill members of the Politburo. They were all sent to jail, but they were not executed because Stalin died meanwhile, right? They were all sent to jail, and they were found guilty of some high treason or something for conspiring to kill members of the Politburo. This is basically it. Okay. Now, in the film, the protagonist is a guy called General Klensky. He's Jewish. He's a general. He's not a military. He's a medical thing. He's running an institution for psychiatric patients, right? For psychiatric patients, and he's basically a general. He's a brain surgeon, right? The question is, but he's a general. He's got the rank of major general. That's his basic thing. And the point is, as he realizes, very soon after the film begins, he realizes that he is himself going to be arrested for being implicated in the doctor's plot, for being a member of the doctor's plot. So this is basically it, right? And he tries to avoid it. He goes to a party, he goes here, he goes there. Now, the whole point is that Stalin, nothing is known very much about Stalin. There is some crisis brewing in the thing. And the whole film is done as a kind of memory of this man's son. There's a Major General Klensky's son, who has something to reveal about his father, who seems to have disappeared somewhere towards the end of the war, at the time of 1953. Okay. And this entire narration is this boy's narration that he's telling. This boy, now fully grown up. He's an elderly person or whatever. He's telling the story from memory. And this film is basically that memory. So what General Klensky happens is that Stalin is not there, but there is structure. Everybody is benefiting from this structure. There are various levels. The Stalin himself is not ruling anymore. He's too old and he's too decrepit. The point is that structure is there, and Klensky himself is running his institution, whatever mental institution, like a tyrant in many ways. He's got a double. Now, the double is a thing. Why he's got a double, I don't know. But the point is that doubles are frequently used in Stalin. We don't know how they would come in useful. People who look like each other were kept together. They would make confessions. People like who looked like me would be kept alongside so that he would make a confession on my behalf if I was missing or some such thing, to say I was responsible for some particular thing. Okay. Now, at some point, Klensky is arrested. Okay. Then sent off to the Gulag. He's taken in a Gulag. He's molested by other prisoners and is assaulted by those, youth communists called the Komsomol. There's the youth communists who are there. He's waiting for something. He can't escape anywhere. There's nowhere he can go. Right. There's a lot of detail in the film. The way the film is done is, okay, now let us assume, normally what is the thing? You'll have shall we say, a number of events happening in a certain room. There won't be one event. There'll be 20 different events happening. An insect is crawling here. Something is happening to me. The KGB is trying to arrest me from outside. Okay. Some boy is playing somewhere. Now, all these are events. What Garman is doing is not differentiating between the different events. Okay. The KGB man trying to break inside, arrest me, gets the same dramatic thing as the child in the room playing with some wolf's head or something, trying to frighten people with the wolf's head. Another man somewhere else in the neighboring house. You see, these houses are all, one aristocratic house is divided into several things where important people will get. So the question is, 5 or 6 households will be running in the same aristocratic household, right? That's the way it is done. So the question is, next door, we don't know where one house ends and the next household begins, right? That is the way. So the question is, because of this, it's difficult to subtitle this movie. You don't know what is the conversation which is significant and what is not. So what Garman is doing is to tell us that personal memory, because history was so full of indoctrination, also so full of falsities in the Stalinist thing, that personal memory which does not try to distinguish is more important. So the KGB guy coming in, arresting this guy is no more important than this boy playing somewhere, the neighbor trying to do push-ups with some, something else. All of them are equally, all of them are happening at the same time. So the question is that this refusal to identify one as dramatic and the other as undramatic itself makes it feel very complicated. Okay. It would be difficult to you to subtitle the film. We don't know exactly what is important. Okay. That is the way this film is constructed. Okay. Anyway, Klensky is arrested, taken in this thing to a gulag, but somewhere along the way, okay, some people come looking for Klensky. He's let free. He's given back his uniform. He's given back his rank. Okay, and he's taken somewhere. We don't know where he's taken. He's taken somewhere in a car. Okay, and he's taken to a big farm or a dasha or something somewhere with huge grounds and all that, where he's given an invitation card or a pass. He's given a pass to go in, and he goes inside this place, inside this the dasha, where there are some nurse and there is some chap. There's an old fellow there. There's a fat fellow whom he doesn't recognize. There are various things going on. There's an old man lying in bed. Okay, obviously sick. He's just, he's defecated in his bed, right? So the question is, he's stinking because of that. The nurse has not been able to clean him. He's on his last legs. He's breathing. He's vomiting in his thing. Klensky doesn't know what is happening. He just knows. He turns to this fat man who's there and says, is he your father? He asks. So this fat man says, yes, father, well said, he says. Okay, he doesn't realize. Then the wind comes through the window and the cupboard door opens and he sees the white uniform. That white uniform is famous for Stalin's white uniform. So this man who's dying here, defecating in his own bed, okay, he's soiled his own sheets, he's been pissing, he's been doing all this in his own sheets, is Stalin, who's had a cerebral hemorrhage, okay, he's had a stroke, he's dying. And this man, because he's because he's a brain surgeon, is being brought back here in order to revive Stalin. That is the reason. So basically, he is coming on Stalin. Stalin is dying. He also dies there at that particular moment. This Klensky, Major General. Then people lose interest in him. You say the fat guy is Beria, Lavrenti Beria, who's head of the KGB. Or rather, it was the NKVD. He was head of the NKVD, right? He was head of the NKVD. And he was trying to seize power after Stalin said he had put somewhere when Stalin was on his last legs. Beria had infiltrated the thing and had got people everywhere. Unfortunately for him, he got some 4 or 5 people got together, including Khrushchev, Malenkov, a couple of other guys. They got hold of him and executed him. Okay, for some rape and all that. For some rape, this thing they got hold of him and executed him, and they formed this troika of 3 people to take charge of affairs, and Beria himself was executed. So this film is dealing with that moment of Stalin's death, and then this chap is, you should go back to your place wherever you are, he says, and he sends him off. So this guy goes back. The whole thing is, being churning going on. Other people who are arrested are being let off. The whole thing is upside down. This guy himself, Klensky himself, doesn't go back home. I think he gives up everything and he pushes off somewhere. He abandons this whole thing. And when he's on a train in incognito, he's not even in his dress. He's got his hand from I don't know if you followed that. His hand is, dangling from the berth in one of the train. Klensky incognito is no longer in civilian uniform. His hand is there. And the man passes by his hand, sniffs at his hand and makes a face. His hand is obviously stinking. Why is that hand stinking? That is the remnants of the father of the nation. The Stalin's thing wiped Stalin's mouth, the vomit or something from Stalin's thing is wiped. Okay, so that smell on his hand, which is smelt by that person who is in the lower berth, is basically the smell of the father of the nation on his last legs. Okay, this is the thing. He's got hold of that. I don't know. So this is the thing. Shall we say this is the kind of comic thing that finally there's nothing which remains of Stalin except his bad odor. Stalin is abbreviated to a bad odor is what the film is doing, right? No, the point is it's done with great attention to detail. Okay, a bird sitting on a tree has got as much importance as. So the question is, whatever I told you about this thing of singling out certain moments as dramatic, right? He is trying to work with private memory. What exactly is private memory? Why should this be more remembered? Why should that be less remembered? Private memory, because of the use that misuse that Stalinist history, was put to, right? He thinks private memory is more, so which is why he praises Fellini. But Fellini, what happens in Fellini's case is that private memory is subordinated to Fellini's personality, right? If you've seen Amarcord, I don't know how you've seen Amarcord. If you've seen Amarcord, okay, this thing of fascism, it is dealt with as a very charming thing in some way. So it's that kind of thing. Okay, and one more thing I will think about this in this film, talk about the interesting thing is what is this thing of conversations at cross purposes. No, I'll tell you this. When you look at American cinema, okay, if husband tells the wife I love you and wife tells husband I love you too, which is standard dialogue in American cinema, there is no doubt in the spectator's mind that both of them understand the meaning of the word identically. Okay, both of them mean the same thing by the word by the word love, which means that there is no communication gap between people. Okay, they don't talk at each other, they're actually talking to each other. Now if you look at something like Garman, there is never a sense in Garman's film that people are talking to each other, they're talking at each other, right? Now my own sense is in Indian cinema also they're talking to each other. Okay, there is never at each other. Now here the fact that they're talking at each other is very important, because my own sense of it is that what is the thing which makes people understand each other in fiction, right? It's a common goal, a common thing, a common, when you say, when husband and wife tell each other I love you and they mean the same thing by love, they're both referring to a certain thing of the nuclear family, the meaning of the sanctity of the nuclear family, which is crucial in American cinema, because it represents in many ways the American way, right? So the question what I'm trying to make is this sense of nationhood, common nationhood in American cinema, okay, makes people talk to each other, understand each other, right? Even when they distrust each other, they're still understanding. In this Garman's film, there's a complete lack of understanding because the sense of nationhood is weak. It has been abandoned. Okay. So you could say that the sense of nationhood is deliberately being brought into question. Do we have a common, I don't know if I'm making sense here, okay? This sense of do we belong to a single community by which we understand each other in the same way through the same words? I think that's being asked into question. You look at that, you look at this, right? I think I won't go very much. There's this guy called, this critic called Mikhail Bakhtin, Bakhtin, where he talked about, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. The basic difference is that Dostoevsky, what he calls dialogic, that people are talking at each other, people are saying things. They're not subordinated to the purpose of their author, right? In Tolstoy's works, everybody's dialogue, everything is subordinated to authorial discourse. I don't know if I'm making sense. The authorial purpose of Tolstoy makes everything subordinated to that. Whereas Dostoevsky, they're talking at cross purposes. This is that kind of what I'm talking about in Garman is that kind of polyphony. It's not cacophony, but polyphony. Multiple voices are not subordinated to a uniform, what is it called, to a single purpose. Okay, this is what my understanding from the film. It's a very difficult film to make sense of. I've written something on it. It's in my book, but it's too expensive. It's some 1,000 rupees. It's in Bloomsbury. I've written on Garman. I've written on Bresson. I've written on all these people. You can check it out on. It's a Bloomsbury book. I wouldn't expect you to probably. It's too bloody expensive. Some 1,000 rupees or something. It's got on all these people. So anyway, this is the thing. This is basically what I wanted to say. Do any of you have any ideas what I'm talking about? This is a somewhat difficult idea, whatever I'm dealing with. Does it make whatever I said, does it make any sense to you? What about you, Mohammed? Did you see the movie?
Yes, sir. I have seen. It does make sense, sir. Right now, when you told me that, the smell of the hand, I could get that. I could get that. But coming down to literature, I couldn't really get that. Probably I'm not very well
No, don't
versed with
bother
it.
about. No, I'm just giving you this
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Don't bother too much about
yeah,
the
yeah.
Bakhtin and all that. I mean, that's a little too advanced. Don't bother about that. But basically, there is a thing of
Yeah, yeah.
of polyphony. Okay, polyphony, which is multiple voices, which it says that the direct speech in a conversation. Okay, there is authorial discourse, which is the author's purpose. There's direct speech. There are various stylized speech of various sorts. There'll be official jargon. There'll be various things. He says in a particular thing, which is like polyphonic in many ways, that it would all operate at different levels. They would not be geared towards one purpose. Okay. Whereas in authorial, in American cinema, this authorial thing, which is that everything is geared towards a single purpose. That everything is single purpose. Okay.
Just
Yeah.
one question, sir. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, you get that, no? Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, this is difference, right? This is I mean, I'm happy that you understand that thing. That Dostoevsky is what is called carnivalesque. It's called, what has been called carnivalesque, like a carnival. In a carnival, what happens is, okay, that there is some fundamental thing. Let's take a Congress exhibition. Do you remember this Congress exhibition? There is fundamental authorial discourse, okay, of the Congress, the future of India, the trajectory of India in the Congress exhibition, right? On the other side, you've got these some jokers doing this, somebody selling bel puri, somebody selling something else, that kind of thing, right? So the question is, the individual activities which is going on in this fair, in this carnival, is not subordinated to the central purpose of the carnival. You get me? Okay. In Tolstoy's novels, okay, everything is subordinated to the central purpose of the author. In Dostoevsky's, it is not the case, which is why Dostoevsky will be taken to be a less important writer than Tolstoy by many people. Okay, but Dostoevsky is doing this dialogue that different people operating at their own levels. One person making fun when somebody does something, the other person makes fun of it, right? So it's multiple dialogues, multiple things. It's multiple things. So that is the thing. I'm very happy Ravi has understood this thing and he's caught on to this. Okay, it's not an easy thing to understand. It's a very difficult thing. So this whole thing of Dostoevsky and shall we say polyphony is what somebody like Gurman is trying. Since you understand that, Ravi, I would welcome you to request you to have a look at this movie on YouTube. It's something else. I mean, it's a very difficult film. But again, I would definitely recommend difficult movies to everybody, right? So this is the thing, right? I've got some 4 or 5 questions. Okay, absolutely, right? Okay, yeah. But the Dostoevsky is completely different from Tolstoy in that sense. But the point is, people will normally take Tolstoy to be the great writer, right? Because he's classical. There's a certain structure in Tolstoy. Dostoevsky will simply fire in all directions, right? But the point is, Dostoevsky is very complex. Brothers Karamazov is very complex. The point is, its complexity is of a different nature. Now, you have to understand the question is that now many more people read Dostoevsky than they read Tolstoy. Because now with the present thing of history today not being possible to be written at all, okay, there are only multiple voices. There is no longer this thing of shall we say, the master narrative of history available anymore. Okay, this is my sense of it. Okay, so I think Dostoevsky is becoming more and more relevant today. Okay, because of multiple voices, because of the polyphony in Dostoevsky, rather than Tolstoy, who still, I think the classical novel of the Tolstoy kind is outdated. It cannot exist anymore. It is no longer relevant. So, which is why something like Alexei German I would say that Alexei German is far more relevant to us today than somebody like Tarkovsky, who's still classical, right? Tarkovsky still has this authorial thing. He's always imposing a vision on his films, right? He's imposing something. He's classical in that sense. Whereas German is not. Okay. So this is basically my
So
point.
what do you think of Mirror, sir, on the
It's
similar
very difficult to
backdrop?
talk about it. But even there, I think it's that's again a memory. It's a very difficult film, a much more difficult film than I would. I've written about it somewhere. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, correct. So the question is, Brothers Karamazov it's something else. Okay, it's got all kinds of passages. Some of them are can't stand at all. It's Christian things, and some of them are something else, hilarious. I mean, it's complete chaos. Okay, which you can't say about War and Peace or Anna Karenina. So they are great novels in the classical sense. This is not in that sense. But it's different. You have to alter your notion of the novel, right? So this entire thing between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky is very important if you're understanding Kristallov, my car. Okay. So the thing is that Dostoevsky now has become something else. He's become another value. So people who are, accustomed to this, the classical narrative, the whatever Dostoevsky crams into his books, the kind of, the something making fun of the same thing, which is writing seriously about that polyphony is something which you won't come across. Garman is a bit like that. Okay. I think Balabanov is also a bit like a lot of Russian, with the weakening of the Russian nation in many ways. I mean, nationhood, the sense of weakening with glasnost and all that. I think this polyphony came into its own. A lot of Russian movies are like that. Okay. Choreography is chaotic. That sort of thing has happened quite a bit. So this is the thing. After having said this, I'll stop. Any other questions, I'll be happy to take. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining. And thank you
Bye,
everyone
Mohammed.
for joining.
Yeah.